Hello, my name is Paul Zanazanian, and welcome to History in the Now Conversations, a podcast on history and how we use it in our everyday lives. History in the Now Conversations explores how we use history to know who we are, to know how to think and feel, and to know how to engage in our daily routines. History in the Now Conversations examines what history is, what it does, and how we can use it or even should use it in our everyday lives. Today's guest is Jerome Garot from the Netherlands, who works in manufacturing. Jerome is a senior project manager at Silicon, a metal fabrication company that designs and manufactures a wide range of specialist, heat-resistant anchors for use in industrial applications. More specifically, through his work, Jerome performs niche industrial repairs and provides technical consultancy for a variety of industries such as nuclear, military, petrochemical, and other such quote-unquote infrastructure critical industries. Throughout his career, Jerome has been able to develop a dozen patents and has participated in creating industry standards at the American Petroleum Institute. Jerome, hello and welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. We met on the plane and there was severe turbulence and I was having a moment and you were playing video games and then we started chatting. Well, we started chatting before, but we really had a nice conversation and I found your life story very interesting. So I'm very happy that you're here today. It's very kind. Could you tell us a little bit of what your field is and what your company specifically does?
Sure. I think a company like ours, it's a little bit of the kind of the hidden backbone of society. Manufacturing, I think, is an important part in how things are built. And, you see beautiful buildings here, but they consist of ingredients and raw materials and trades and skills to build those things. So we're a small part of that, making things a particular way. Some people make paintings and we make different shapes from raw materials.
So you deal with shapes
Yeah.
and putting shapes together. It's really the nitty-gritty actualization of the structures or the infrastructures that we see and use in our daily lives to make our lives easier. So you work in that.
Yeah, correct.
And what is it that your company does more specifically?
Well, we solve very niche problems that you may not face on people's everyday lives. These are high industrial temperature applications where things break down because a high temperature will typically lead to some type of damage, some type of breakage. And these vessels are typically protected by a type of high temperature concrete to keep it simple. And we are simply a support structure. So we assess what type of temperatures could be experienced, what type of corrosive elements, and we will design the metal component to support the protective lining inside of those vessels.
That's so interesting. So when you say vessels, are you talking about boats or?
Actually, no, not both. And this is kind of funny because the lingo is also incredibly specific. And even the concept of anchors, it's actually kind of a not a misnomer, but when you think about an anchor, you think about a boat anchor. This is why you probably said boat vessels. But we, like I said, we are a support structure for concrete. So what we really focus around is high temperature processing vessels of chemicals such as crude oil into oil sands or trash incineration. In Europe, you're using a high flame or some type of high ignition to turn all kinds of products into other products using high temperatures. And with those high temperatures, you need to contain it. And those are the type of vessels that I'm referring to.
So the vessels are the
Big steel bins, essentially.
big steel bins in which you process or transform all sorts of metals and
Anything, essentially, because the beautiful thing with heat and fire and flame is that you can convert anything, not only from one state into another, but also from different parts into one cohesive. Let's say if you're creating a slab of steel, you're putting a lot of things together. Whereas in the petrochemical industry, you'll take a barrel of crude oil and you'll convert that into countless of products, plastics, fuels, things that you see in everyday life. And it all starts from one little thing.
Okay, wow. So that's quite fascinating. So you're basically getting raw materials from nature that are transformed through those vessels, those metal bins.
So imagine a building, but it will be made from steel instead of bricks.
Okay.
So that steel contains all the heat inside so that the process can be performed. And sometimes, like you said, natural minerals or natural products into other products. And sometimes it's man-made products that need to be broken down back into raw materials. So like trash, for example, or types of trash with a lot of heat, you could turn it back into carbon. And then from that carbon, you can turn it into something else again. So it's kind of an ecosystem, really, when you think about it.
That's so interesting. This has been going on for a long time, I'm assuming.
Yeah, a long, long time.
Wow, it must have its own culture and way of doing things. That's quite interesting.
Yeah, it's got its own unique culture. It's actually a very small business, frankly. Like you'll find the same people in my industry somehow pop up in a different country and you'll bump into them. You know, with the world of 7-8 billion people, it's quite unique to bump into randoms that you've met once before on the other side of the world. So the industry itself is it's niche, it's small, but it's I mean, I love it. So
Yeah, sounds like must be a lot of pressure and stress too. What is it that you specifically do in this industry?
well, it's transformed a little bit over the last 18 years since I started. I started out on the shop floor, but where I really found my calling was out in the field. So doing the physical repairs themselves inside of these vessels when they're shut down, they need a repair every 3 to 4 years because they go through a lot of this temperature damage. And I found myself really excited by the concept of travel and facing problems that you would never find in real life. And every single time you open something up for a repair, it is a problem that it's like puzzle pieces that needs to be solved. And I love puzzles. And so the challenge of fixing something that very little people know how to fix, and with a customer that's incredibly happy, gives me a satisfaction that I'd never had before.
Academia is very similar to that, also trying to solve problems and come up with interesting solutions. So I like that comparison. So that's very specific, as you said. You must have had a lot of training. Your job must be difficult because you're out there in those vessels. You started off as going out there in those vessels and you are fixing things or making sure that things are running smoothly. So that's difficult and it must be dangerous.
It is incredibly dangerous. There are a lot of injuries and deaths around the world in this industry. I think that gives me a little bit of a thrill as well. But the real thrill is in the problem solving. I like to actually be hands-on. And I think one of the unique things about how we approach things is it's the more challenging, the more exciting it gets. And that's really how we dive into them, and we'll come up with new products whenever we face something. And it's a quick iteration to meet a demand that is only just experienced and just found out.
You've transformed. You said you started off working and like fixing and repairing, and now you are doing something else?
Yeah, so I started out on the shop floor, then I traveled for over a decade, and then COVID happened. Things slowed down a little bit, and my position changed in the company as well. It was started by my father. So he retired, and so me and my sister are now the owners.
Oh, okay.
And of course, that comes with different responsibilities.
Yes.
So
a lot of stress.
yeah. So I'm in that transition at the moment, trying to be more present, trying to hand over things to my colleagues who are just a fantastic team. Yeah, that is a transition, but you still miss the memories of the unique challenge. So it's trying to balance that change and responsibility as well, while still trying to find the things I enjoy doing.
So you're learning new skills while trying to still enjoy the thrill
Yes.
of going in there and getting your hands dirty.
Yeah. But I have to live vicariously through my colleagues who are actually in the field. So I like to call them. I like to say, "How's it going? Show me some pictures," to stay involved into the action, so to speak.
Wow, that is fascinating. In your bio, it's mentioned that you worked, or the company you work for, caters to certain industries such as petrochemical, nuclear, and military, and cement. And are those controversial?
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the hard things I had when I started out in the company is how do I, what do I think about it ethically? Because when I was younger, and I think when you're younger, you're always having a little bit of a different feeling about things because you're not really ingrained in the world as much. And truly, everything is kind of a fairy tale until you really start paying taxes, frankly. And it was hard for me to start first because I always had this negative thing about banks and oil, and you see these caricatures of these big bad men. There's movies made about it, about how the oil industry was, and in many ways it is a dirty industry. But when I started entering into it, and part of this could be self-justification because, of course, I'm into it and I'm benefiting from it. But a lot of these people, they're just great people. In time, also maybe because the thrill of it, I really started looking into, how do I feel about it years later? And something I mentioned before, that infrastructure critical piece, and that's really the real part of society where I had to think that even though it may not be the best way, it has been a good way. And I think it's more about trying to find a balance between where we're going to go as a society, but not letting things drop too soon because of this big push towards green and everything. I think green is good because there's a good commercial sense to it because the sun is free, for example, but it cannot fill the need at this moment. So you have to have, I think, a good natural transition to that without trying to vilify the oil industry as much. And that's just one industry, but you could probably say the same about, the military industry and so forth, which is probably trickier for a lot of people to try and defend. But I've always tried to stay out of politics, and I look at the challenges of life and not be too pick a side type of mindset, because I see a lot of people, they're very fervent about what they believe. And I just like the experience of life, and I'm just going to go through it, see what makes me happy. And at least if I stay good and if it doesn't let me change who I am, then I think it should be perfectly fine to do so.
So, in other words, we enjoy a good level, quality of life in the West. And we wouldn't have this quality of life if we didn't have people working in your industry, because you're giving us the quality of life. So I understand that. And am I correct?
Yeah, it's a thankless job.
Thankless. And at the same time, you have your own moral bearing and you know where you're headed as a person. And I know we've spoken, and like, you're fun, you're a foodie, you like to live in hip areas, and you're a fun person. You like art, you like music, you like video games, you're like a regular person.
Just a dude.
Just a dude. And if you don't do it, someone else is going to do it. And this is just the job that you have. And at the end of the day, a job is a job, is a job, is a job. So
to a degree, yes. But within that, I wanted to be good at something and wanted to actually bring value. So even though somebody could do a similar type of job, I think what we do is actually incredibly unique in that we do try to find a better way to do things. So we kind of have this idea, at least with our team, that we're doing something good. Because if we do a good job and we make things last as best as possible by doing actually the best repair, unforeseen damages actually have a lot of consequences into the environment. When a refinery breaks down, there's an incredible amount of toxicity that goes out. And if you look at all the explosions that happened over the last 20 years, those are none of my customers. So if you do a good job, I do think that we're doing something better for the environment, frankly. But people could probably fight me on that, frankly. But I do think that what we do is not just replaceable. We really do something that nobody else does.
So earlier you talked about the sun. I'm assuming you were talking about solar energy?
Correct, yeah.
So Since you have a foot in the industry, in the field, where are we headed in terms of using all these natural resources for developing our infrastructure?
We're going to have to be, I think I forgot what the terminology is, but you have to be multifaceted. So you have to have multiple energy sources to actually be kind of sustainable, but also independent. Because every country that only relies on oil, if something happens, let's say like a supply chain drops down, you're taking a big risk. But if you have a combination of, you have nuclear, which I think is one of the best energy sources, frankly, for industrial and for cityscapes and for every, supporting real infrastructure, I think nuclear is the best.
Because it's clean, or
It's clean, but it's also reliable.
but what does clean mean? Meaning that it's
Well, there's no CO2 output, and you could say, well, there's nuclear waste, but they keep developing ways to process the nuclear waste, and so it's basically like an infinite energy source that is just very reliable. And the hazards that a lot of people associate with nuclear, it's been already designed out for 30 years. And if you look at how France is doing it, they have incredibly little waste and an incredible high output, and also a lower cost of energy, which is what it comes down to at the end of the day. Being independent, having enough energy to support all efforts in society, you need to also drive that price down.
so nuclear is one of the most promising directions to go in because it's a source of energy, and the pollution that it emits can be it's always
handleable.
it's handleable. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can
And
handle
whereas-
it, and you can solve problems, and it evolves.
Yeah. Whereas with oil, it's very hard to control the output and having the effect reduced. So I get the stress and the force and maybe the political force that's being put onto the petrochemical industry. I fully understand it, but you have to do a natural transition because based on market dynamics, I think it makes sense to eventually move towards nuclear and solar for domestic, for example. I think solar makes the most domestically. It makes the person independent. Nuclear helps a city be independent. And I think the petrochemical industry will have a very important part in just manufacturing because you still use plastics. And if you look at all the protests that have happened over the last few years, it's more related to the power provision because gasoline and so forth that refineries make, that has been reduced, but the refineries are still there because people still have iPhones, still have plastic everywhere. Everything is plastic around us. Cleaning agents, cosmetics, everything is oil at the end of the day. And so that really is still there, but they're using processes to make those that are less toxic than making gasoline, for example.
So, for example, people say that with AI, we need to use a lot of nuclear power. And a lot of people, when they hear that, they get nervous or they have an opinion. And if nuclear energy is controlled, like the output or the waste is controlled properly with all the new technologies we have, then is what you're saying suggesting that it's something that we can handle?
Absolutely. People think of nuclear, the last thing that's on everybody's mind is Fukushima, right, in Japan. That was a very old technology. It leaked into the earth, and that is really the risk that people are looking at. But one of the designs that I think now some of the bigger companies do, and I won't name any names, but they basically build a giant bucket before they build anything. So that if anything goes wrong, which it hardly ever does, but if it would, it can't go anywhere. It would just stay in its little bucket and not be able to penetrate the earth.
Now, when it comes to protests and climate change activists, are they needed? Like, do they help steer industry in a way? Like, do they help? Are they useful? And if so, in what way are they useful?
Unfortunately, I don't think they are. What we've seen happen a lot, because I work globally, so my customers that are leaving Europe because of the protests drive cultural change, and cultural change drives political change, and political change drives corporate changes. And so what happens a lot is that these people will just pack up and they'll just invest elsewhere, and it will just go to Asia. So what we've seen a lot is growth in Asia and the Middle East, and the output is higher than they ever did in Europe. And we all share one world. That's not like that, you take it out of Europe, the air condition may be better, right? The breathability, sure, I believe with 100% it's better, but you sacrifice the economic independence. And when we have a lot of welfare societies in Europe, which makes it very livable, very social, but it can only happen when there's an abundance of economic development. And when you take those out, it puts extra burden on the actual welfare state. And that is, unfortunately, a self-induced injury when you protest these type of things, because it achieves something, it definitely does, but it doesn't really achieve the best for the local economy, I believe.
Do you have, you don't have to answer this. It's more of a, I guess, existential kind of question because you really got me thinking. Do you have a pessimistic outlook for the world? Do you think that we're headed in a certain direction that we're basically shooting ourselves in the foot? Or do you have more of a positive or optimistic outlook?
I think I'm always optimistic because I do believe at the end of the day that people are good. So when you have so many people, the natural conclusion is that only good will eventually come out of it. But I do think we're in for a very painful decade with the changes in AI and effects on the labor market, on low-skilled labor. And that, I think, is going to be an incredibly tough thing to swallow because nobody has a plan for it, but it's an inevitable thing that will happen very soon.
Did you say decade?
Yeah, in the next 10 years, I think at least.
Okay, so you think it'll get fixed after 10 years, hopefully.
It will probably get starting to get fixed after 10 years. But until that time, I do believe it's going to be hard. But because it'll be so prevalent, everybody will have to try to figure out something. And that's why within 10 years, I do, because you have to kind of follow the political cycle on this. I mean, 4 or 2 or X amount of years, it has to go with the political winds and political change. So anywhere from 8 to 12 years, probably more on the 12-year side, starting with discussions around the 10 years, I think.
And the changes or the difficulties you mentioned are related to the labor market more so than the impact on nature or the climate.
Yeah, I think nature will always find a way to resolve itself. I personally was a lot more into the way the world gets affected by humans when I was younger. But there is no real alternative. Either we figure out how to deal with the consequences of existing, which inevitably requires you to have an effect on the climate, or the alternative is live in squalor. The only real alternative is to go back to the medieval times where you don't have these luxuries and you don't get the prosperity that you tend to get with high energy consumption. So it's pick or choose. And I think maybe because I'm optimistic, if you are in an abundance of energy and you put in the right controls to mitigate the risks, then you should outgrow and prosper out of the problem. So let's say we get more hurricanes. Okay, how do we just become more innovative to solve those problems instead of trying to say we should get rid of all our refineries and then China has maybe 20 more refineries and it just blows over eventually anyway. We should choose to, in the West, be the leaders. So the alternative would be let's build more energy makers and maybe not refineries, but let's make more energy so that we can solve the problem. So let's put a smart spin on it. Let's find the best and the brightest to help solve that problem because we know what we're doing.
So politicians behind the scenes would more or less be aware of all this, aware of what you just said.
They are, but not in the way that you may think so. I have been to some of the exhibitions where the frustration is very clear with the refiner side. The politicians will call them up and say, hey, you got to start doing hydrogen. And then later on that month, turns out it's not so easy to just manufacture hydrogen. It requires a lot of things, not to go into details. And then the refiner goes, and then they just called me up again. They say, well, you got to hit your energy quota. So you got to, run your refinery 10 times as hard. And you're getting into this really, it's almost like a girlfriend that doesn't know what she wants. And that's how the refiners are being talked to by their politicians, because they want to serve their market, but then they're getting heavily taxed, and then they relieve the tax so that they can do more. So it makes it incredibly unfavorable to do business. And politicians, they're not technical. They're really just, in many ways, actors with some weight behind them. But at the end of the day, I don't see much happening from political parties. And I'll be honest, I don't follow politics that much, but with the way I see it, things they didn't seem to be improving a lot for the current people, where the prices go up for a lot of people, the cost of living, everything like that. And the overall sentiment towards politics is also negative. So all that really rolls into not a good outcome.
In terms of academia or universities or professors, what would you like to see coming out of universities in terms of research and ideas in relation to the general industries you're talking about?
Well, I think a lot of excellence is already coming out of schools, but it's coming from the practical side. So you see fantastic engineers coming out of school nowadays. But to be maybe a bit blunt, I think it's most important for kids to start looking at what education can I go into that will actually benefit society from a practical perspective. So taking it really into, and I don't want to say manufacturing, but real things or technology or something like that. Because like I said, those are where the solutions lie. Because I think you can put a lot of thought in theory, and I do believe they are very important in society, just like the arts and everything like that. But unfortunately, it doesn't tend to solve the problems that we're facing in society at this moment. So I think the shift towards real practical sciences should continue to grow and should also be emphasized in schools, because that is what the world needs. And it would also help give kids a calling and a duty, because I think a lot of people resonate by giving them some type of a purpose. And if we make it clear that the world is in need for this type of excellence, then I think people will also be driven, self-driven, to achieve those type of results.
So earlier, you mentioned that your father started the company that you're working for right now. Did you always want to work for your dad? What kind of schooling did you go through to get where you are today?
To be very honest, I never thought I was going to work there because I had no idea what he did. It is that niche of an industry and that niche of a product that as you grow up as a kid or as a teenager, you can't even grasp the concept of what he makes and what he contributes to the world. So when I was growing up, I didn't really think there was any point in doing it because I'm maybe a bit more of a different type of person. At the time when I was younger, I didn't like getting dirty. I didn't like getting, working hard physically because I was, a bit of a skinny kid. But as I grew up, it was quite interesting. I started to see what he did and the challenges that he faced. And I thought more from a familial connection that I should be part of the company to help and support him because I could see that it was hard on him. So I didn't really have an in from a technical interest, but more out of a family duty, luckily self-imposed instead of forced onto me that I think a lot of parents normally do. It was my choice. Same for my sister. And from that point on, I saw what I considered I'd need for this type of technical stuff. So I did commercial engineering, and it was just too broad. And I could see my dad being, a very specific type of technical, and the company being so niche. I'd figured that this type of stuff is too broad. Let me just focus on what he does. And then I learned probably more on the dinner table than I could ever learn from a book. Because again, it's not something that you can really pick up and study. It's something that you kind of have to live. And outside of that, for a short stint after I left commercial engineering, I focused more on whatever I could get my hands on in terms of courses and putting a particular interest in public speaking, marketing, business administration, kind of a collection of whatever I could get my hands on. And then my money ran out and went back home and started working right away.
So in a way, you curated your own educational pathway according to your own interests. You knew, like the moment you knew that you wanted to help your dad, and you said to yourself, "This is what I want to do," then you decided that I'm going to take these types of courses because I know it's going to lead me to where I want to go.
Yeah. And I think part of it is also my sister is actually a fantastic student. She's kind of an ideal daughter, I would say. Always studies very hard, never parties, never does anything, frownable upon. And I'm a competitive person. So I think it was easier for me to find my own way to be good at my own direction because my sister is just too smart for me to compete with her. It's like, it's not fair. She would always beat me in every game. She's 6 years older, so obviously she has a leg up on me on many different ways growing up. And seeing her being really good at engineering, she's a real engineer and just smart in all kinds of ways. I had to be smart in a more creative way, frankly.
So you both complement each other really well.
Yes.
That's really good. What I found interesting about what you said is that you learned more at the dinner table than you did in school. And that's, well, I still teach philosophy of education courses. So that's an interesting concept or idea that you just mentioned, like learning more from the dinner table. Could you expand on that? I'm
Absolutely.
very curious.
I think one of the successes is that when you go into more formal setting, even if it's in the office, a lot of education or a lot of speaking or teaching is one directional because you got a large group. You don't have time for every single individual to kind of banter or back and forth. But I'm quite curious. So the moment I latch onto a question, I will keep asking, while he's having food in his mouth. You can just keep asking questions until you get to the core that satisfies your curiosity.
Mm.
And there's no syllabus to my questions. It is interest as it builds up, as you find things out, as you come across new interesting things, you can get much deeper on a very specific line. And the issue I've always had with, maybe teaching my colleagues, what's the right way to start? And how do I travel from a beginner to an expert? And I've always had that trouble, but it's always easy when they come with the questions because then you're immediately filling an interest. Whereas if I'm just talking to them, they may latch on to 10, 20%, and they'll forget the rest because they don't have a curiosity yet to fill that need within them.
So it's curiosity and self-reflexivity in a way.
Absolutely.
Wow, very interesting. That this curiosity, was it always innate in you? Or is it something that you gained at a younger age?
That's a great question. I don't think, and I was very young, I think up to a teenager, I didn't have much interest in things unless I could have some type of competition in it, frankly. I played some sports, and I was actually a very good Sudoku player, a competitive Sudoku player, believe it or not. And for some reason, I wasn't interested in school because it never felt like it would get me anywhere. It was all, standard syllabus stuff. And so there was no real point to me being the best at it. Like getting an A+ means nothing to me because it doesn't do anything for me personally. I understand the importance of education because for a lot of people, there is a long-term path to that success, and there's judgment based on that. But I never really cared about the actual results because at the end of the day, 10 years down the road, what am I doing in the world? That was really going to be more important to me. And I think that curiosity only came once I saw an in to the world where I could create value. And then it was really just, okay, how can I learn new things to become better and better because the only competition essentially is me yesterday, and I don't really see. I don't really like in this type of selection or this type of mindset to try and compete with others like you would in school and in some education systems. It's not a battle worth fighting. I don't like playing competitively on a board game. It's for fun, but in the real world, it's the only real best competitive advantage is trying to be a better person than I was yesterday.
We're going to talk history soon, but before we do that, I just want you to clarify. You mentioned earlier that you're competitive with you yesterday. Could you elaborate on that? I find that really interesting.
Sure. I think when I started becoming more curious, started reading quite a bit, and so every single day I try to reflect on it and maybe not make the mistake I did yesterday, or try to find some learning, or really reflect on it. Something that you said about earlier, or reflectiveness. Really look at myself, because there's always a day it's full of experience itself, and within every experience there's a learning. And so if I'm not conscious of that, then I'm just going to go through life one day at a time. And some people, which I think is incredibly impressive, they can just make a giant mistake and go on with their life. Those things would absolutely destroy me, because it is the.
What do you mean by giant mistake?
Whatever it could be. Let's say like you drop a can off a roof and drops down. You just leave trash, or you hit somebody.
Oh yeah.
And some people, it happens. Like somebody drops a hammer and runs away. It just happens at work. People can get hurt. People have gotten hurt.
Wow.
And I couldn't live with that. And so every day I want to make sure that I'm reflective of maybe not dropping hammers, but more innate things to myself. Because if I'm honest with myself, especially over the years, you can see shortcomings in relationship to the problem you're facing or the person you're facing. And when I was younger, for example, I was nervous to talk to girls. And then so that is obviously something you have to overcome if you want to be with a pretty girl. So these are just problems that at the end of the day, you find your shortcomings and try to overcome that. And that in itself it's also a fun challenge. Not only do you get to work on the real world, you also get to work on yourself, because those are really the things that you can have control over.
It's quite experiential what you're saying.
I suppose, yeah.
Fascinating. Let's talk history. So what's the first idea or image that comes to mind when you think of history? And why do you think that image or idea comes to mind?
When I think about history, the only thing that comes to mind immediately is, I think, my frustration with my history teacher that I had in high school. Not in middle school, because it seems to, I guess, be fine. I don't really have much emotions toward that. But my first real teacher in high school that was a history teacher, because I was always some type of curious, even maybe not the useful type of curious that I mentioned earlier, but I sometimes would ask the teacher, okay, so why is it important for me to know a year? Why is it important for me to know a name? Because I would like to dive more into the details. So when I asked that question, he would say, if you want to be a history teacher. So for me, when you give me that answer, the whole year, maybe the whole schooling related to history is pointless, because I do not want to become a history teacher. So if you give me no purpose to why I should learn this, and I'm just regurgitating pieces of facts, knowledge, without diving into the why or a more deeper concept about this particular historical topic, then it's dead to me.
And this teacher, did he have a background in history, or did he, you probably don't know, was he just teaching because that was his job? And
I think he was teaching because it's his job, but I mean, the way we have education in Holland, I presume he was a history teacher by some type of a educated academic point. I'm not sure, because in his room where you go to do the history lesson,
His
there's a lot of
classroom, yeah.
his classroom. There's a lot of historical objects or things that makes you think, oh, this is a history teacher. So I can only assume.
Yeah, that he had some kind of, okay, so that's, yeah. So
Like
that,
the old maps, the brown things, or like the posters of like times of some type of historical significance.
so in Holland, what kind of history is taught in schools? Like, do you learn the history of Holland or the Netherlands?
Yeah, I mean, part of that. I feel like there's a lot of gaps, and probably because history is an infinite amount of education. So you don't learn about North American history a lot, but the way throughout my life, the way I experienced it and the way I remembered it, is you pretty much go from dinosaurs, prehistoric times, to the Romans, big jump. And then you go into the medieval ages, which is very Holland focused. So the Bronze Age and then the Golden Age. And then you go basically to World War II. And then that's history. There's a lot of gaps in the middle, a lot of jumps in curiosity. It's a long time ago. I'm not sure what education is like now, but I definitely hope it's better than that.
So your teacher was not someone who sparked a passion in you for history
No.
because of the attitude he seemed to have towards your questions of curiosity. Well, what topic were you really curious about and you didn't get an answer on?
For history-related items?
Yeah, like in the history classroom, because you said you ask questions and you go, why is it relevant?
Yeah, well, I
You
think the sad
remember?
thing is that I stopped asking questions
Okay.
after I had that piece of information that, you want to be a history teacher. But I think what my interest level is what's between dinosaurs and the Romans. I think that's a fair question.
They
to
really
ask.
did talk about dinosaurs?
That's part. Yeah, it's part of history.
Okay.
The way we.
Okay.
Evolution. So I would say dinosaurs and caveman. That is the
Okay,
topic.
like prehistory.
Prehistory, prehistoric. I think because I literally thought the way it was presented to me when I was younger, and I know differently now, that pretty much Jesus was born, which is the year 0, when the caveman was still around.
Okay.
That's really how I kind of absorbed that information, because it's almost like from one page onto the other,
Yeah.
and that is strange. Because a lot of things happened around that time. You have the Babylonians, Persians, Aztecs, Mayans, things that I learned about at a later time. But I feel like those gaps are interesting because we are a society now. How do we get here? What was that journey like? And I'm sure dinosaurs play into it probably, but I think it's a bit of a large gap for a child to assume that link and understand that link.
So we talked about the first image or idea that comes to mind. And for you, it's that negative experience in the history classroom when you ask the question of relevance and the teacher basically say, why do you want to know? Are you going to become a history teacher? Now I'm going to ask you, what's your earliest memory of your connection to history?
I think when I got out of school, or nearing the end of my school, when it started slowing down a little bit, I started feeling those curiosities. And specifically the curiosities of what happened when civilization really started kind of getting a move on.
How old were you at this time?
I would think around 16, 17.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, started having a bit more time on my hands. And I did a course on Greek history, because we learned about Roman. And what I always thought was interesting was, the way the Roman civilization was put together, but it was so closely linked to the Greek. And I feel like there was always some type of intellectual competition between them, but we didn't hear so much about the Greek. And I took it upon myself to really look up the first part of a Greek course. And when I really connected for the first time was seeing how passionate the teacher was about the subject.
Oh, okay.
And then it got me excited, and it kind of revivified some of the lost hope I had in teachers. And this was an online course. It was really kind of at my own volition, which means that it allowed me to buy in. I can choose to look into it. And that also kind of put me back into the driver's seat about learning, because I'd really given up on education. I thought it was so pointless. But this filled my curiosity and really helped shape a, a, a piece of history that had not been given to me. And it filled in an important part. The Greek were a very important part to modern society as we are today.
So you are in the driver's seat, meaning that this was online. You had a good teacher who was a good storyteller, and they stimulated you, and they would present on Zoom.
No, this was just a video course. So
Okay.
we didn't have Skype, Zoom back in the day. I just had a course of like, I don't know, it was 10, 12 hours. But me putting into the driver's seat is I can pull up a video whenever I want.
Okay, so it's like pre-recorded.
Yes, pre-recorded.
And you paid for that.
I did not pay for it. I probably should have.
Oh, okay, that's another story.
But when I was that young, I was still pirating.
Well, I still think that at the age of 16, 17, for someone to do that is quite fascinating because you really had this thirst. And so that was your real, I guess, connection to history, where you felt connected.
Yes.
So what was that connection?
I think because I had a hard time first trying to put it into context, because history is really just a fun, cute little story unless you can link it to the now and today. Because I really was curious in how do we get here, and why am I, or why is the culture the way we are today? And I think why I was so curious about Greek philosophy is when I put it into the lens of where we were, Western civilization specifically, because that's where I grew up, that's where I was born, and that's what I'm culturally, I think, inclined to call myself Western, is that Western society, it's really kind of Greek philosophy, Roman law, and Christian values. If you put it all together.
Did you just come up with that now?
No.
Okay. No, I love it. Yeah, just the way you said it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that when you put it all together, it made the most sense as a building block, really, of who we are. And the only thing I'm still a little bit missing of who put that all together. Like, who was the first to really kind of intersect those? And that's maybe a piece I'm still missing. But it's a very natural, it probably just kind of bundled together because there was so many similarities geographically, and I think the church probably had a big part in that. And somehow Europe was amalgamated into these type of values, even though there's a lot of wars in between. I think we were just fighting over territory, but not over values. Whereas nowadays we're really fighting over values more than territory. And putting it into that lens, coming back to the question, was, I think, my connection point, seeing that building block.
So since then, you've had a certain love for history or appreciation?
I would say appreciation. I think love is maybe a bit hard to, at least for me, maybe because maybe I'm a non-academic. For me, it was more like an essential thing to understanding who I am. So it's not really a love. It is really just an essential part of understanding the world. So appreciation is definitely, I think, a better word.
I find it all so interesting. So you learned about your trade at the dinner table. You were curious. You were asking questions. You were self-reflexive. In school, when teachers weren't sparking that curiosity or answering those questions, you took it on yourself to get that information. And it really was a quest for like understanding the world you live in and getting to know your self-identity, like your own identity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And is that what history is in a way?
I think history, it can only be experienced through the lens of how you want to look at it, because it can be a collection of memories. It can be the greatest story ever told. It can also be the greatest lie ever told, wherever you're from and what you're hearing. And I would say that history really can only be experienced through the lens of which either you are fixed on, because some people, I think, only have a single lens to live life through, which I think is sad. But if you understand the different lenses, and if you understand the different contexts about history, because for some people, history is also just personal. They just have, lived trauma. That is their history, and they don't see beyond that. For some, it's the greatest thrill. For me personally, like my life's history, I think it's been a series of ups and downs, but I don't think I would have done it any other way to get where I am today. Painful, but also some of the highest highs I've ever had in my life. So very fortunate. So history is, in some ways, whatever you make it out to be. and the way you change your perspective to interpret it properly.
When you talked about your life experiences, are you talking about your family history? Or are you talking about your own lived since birth experiences?
I would say since birth, because I can't say so much about my family. I haven't lived their lives. I'm a derivative of their successes. And so for me, the context for me to see things through has to be my own. Life starts with me, so I have to look at it from that lens.
Interesting. So could you describe a time, an incident in your life where you had to justify the importance of using history for attaining a goal?
Seeing as I just answered my personal experience, I actually will now kind of have to deviate a little bit from that because there is a lived experience from, I would say, my father's vision of how he approached things. So in some cases, that is very much what I'm trying to do professionally in the company, is continuing his vision of success. And that is a different lens because that is a professional lens. But in that case, he's not my dad. He is the founder of the company. So his history, his successes, and his learned experiences, while I may not have lived them, sometimes I do have to invoke that experience to get people who haven't lived that experience, who haven't seen that, prevent them from going down a road of maybe inefficiency or that leads to a dead end, because we may have already traveled that road, him, myself, and other people. And in that case, history is a guiding tool, and it's a roadmap to a degree of also dead ends, frankly.
Okay. So using not your father, but the person who founded the company as a guiding example on how to be efficient. Is that it?
It's efficient, but also keeping your values in check. Because what I think could be dangerous, especially as you're a growing company, is that the original values of the company may go out the wayside as a sacrifice to efficiency only or to money only, which you often see with public companies going from private to public. I would never want to be a public company because you lose everything, essentially what's important and fun about being a private company. And so for me, it is trying to stick to the original vision of the company. And that really is a guiding line. What did he intend for the company? Because talking a little bit about the soul of the company, he started with a particular purpose. And we may do things differently now, but if we're not using the same soul of it, you're, I think, destined for failure because you become a walking corpse that may be profitable, but there's no soul. And I think that soul is sustainable because the moment you take a soul out of a body, it tends to drop dead as well. And I take that same analogy with a company, and you have to stick within that, true to the original vision of the company.
And is that a recipe for success for many businesses in different fields?
If the company was successful with that vision, because I perfectly believe that you may have a bad vision, because if the vision is bad, then you're not going to succeed. But the fact that we've been around for almost 5 decades means that there's something he did right. And when there's things that are right, that is the things you have to navigate through. Because I'm sure, and maybe there's a bit of a difference between vision and action, because he may have had maybe wrong actions in the past, because that's a judgment call. But the spirit is the intent. And sticking to the spirit and optimizing the practical side, so the actions, using a better technology or updating technology, you have to balance those two things. But the recipe for success is, if it works and if it's doing well, then keep doing that well.
So history in this case is basically a means to maintaining integrity and a certain self-identity.
I would say that exactly right. Yeah. Self-identity and integrity, I would say, is the most probably important for us because we absolutely should stay true to ourselves.
Based on what you've said, because you've said a lot and it's very rich, there's this guiding theme of identity, integrity, the idea of the vision, the idea of being true to yourself, and so forth. Based on what you've said, What do you think history is? You touched upon it a little bit earlier, but if you were to give me a definition of history, and I'm like, okay, Jerome, we're sitting down. Well, we are sitting down. And I go, Jerome, please tell me what history is. Based on what you've said, could you tell me what history is?
You're right. I think I did touch on it a little bit earlier, but I think that's the tricky part about history. I'm not sure it is just one thing, but if I had to formulate it as a thing, it is a story with no start and no end. It really is it's a giant tapestry of infinite possibilities. It's things that has happened and could happen, because in some cases the history is right now as well. And this is what actually, what maybe the best thing to say is, I think history for me is opportunity. And what gives me some joy sometimes is sometimes I'm in the moment and I'm doing a certain thing. And in some points in time, I know that at that moment, I'm actually making history, knowing that in 10 years, I'm looking back on the moment I'm doing it right now with the people I'm with the achievement we've made. And at that moment, it is very satisfying knowing that that is happening.
I like that idea of opportunity. Do you have further thoughts on expanding on the connection you make between history and opportunity?
There's probably a lot more to discover within that, because it is, right now we have just a random question to answer that. But coming back to those opportunities and being in the moment, I think people, sometimes have a term for that. They say seize the day, or, carpe diem. I think in many ways it is being aware of the effect you have in the now that you can have moving forward in the future as well. So opportunity to do great, but also, just opportunity to be aware of the moment and knowing that it's fleeting. It could be gone in, just a heartbeat. And I think it's a sense of hope that even in the now, no matter what you've experienced, you still have that control in the moment to change your course in life. Because I've been in moments where I kind of lost a sense of joy or sense of hope, but the moment you realize that you're still just right here, right now, as much as people could be looking into the past and, hitting themselves in the head, you're also just perfectly able to just make that change and pat yourself on the back for things that you're going towards. And so you're just always in the middle between the past and the future, and you can just tip that scale. And that's what I think, when you look at opportunity, is the exciting part about it. But you'd have to be in the mindset that is possible. And that's why I typically like to go at it from an optimistic side, because I think there's a lot more to optimism, because essentially it leans towards creation. Whereas pessimism, I feel like, tends to lead towards destruction. And it's a lot harder to, build things. I get that, but there's also a lot more satisfaction in that.
What you're saying is very rich, and I'm excited to hear it because it relates to some of the theories and philosophies I read and appreciate when it comes to understanding what history is. Is it based on your curiosity and self-reflexivity that you are able to think like this? Or was there something you've read a book, or is there a theorist or a philosopher that you like and that you read earlier on that has perhaps influenced the way you think about history or the way you just described it?
I think that's a good question. I can only reference one book that I think was really changing in my mindset, and that is The Art of War by Sun Tzu. I had heard about this. I know a lot of people will read it, but I think the rereading of that document I thought was really interesting, because every single time I had read it, and I would read it every flight because it's such a short book, I would read it every flight, and I would put it into the context of that moment and the moments to come. And I know it's probably not known as a philosophy book. I just picked it up as a curiosity, frankly, because I'm honestly not that big of a reader.
What's the book about?
It is really about. I mean, it says the art of war, so how
Yes,
you
that's what I'm
engage. So it's how you engage war. And I thought like it's such a like practical book, and this is where I started understanding some people's mindset, because if you read it very literal, it is a book about war. But if you read it more, maybe not, I don't want to say abstract, but maybe more theoretical
Or metaphorically?
metaphorically, yeah, that's a great word. If you read it metaphorically, it's about conflict, and it's about the momentum of succeeding, the way I see it, because it goes into very Taoist principles, which always fascinated by, because it takes at both sides of a conundrum, and as a problem statement, it looks very deep into both ends of the spectrum, I would say, about problems. And when I looked at that book, you've got these parts where it talks about basically the ground, right? If you let's say if you're having war on a high ground or in muddy, swampy areas, war is harder. But it's not really about war in the context that I'm reading. It is really about trying to understand your position in relation to other people or the conflict and the problem that you're in there. So it's really trying to be able to break down how to best deal with conflict to always succeed into it. And I think that allowed me to really kind of go at it from a different angle.
So conflict for you in this context would mean challenges?
Challenges is one thing, but also maybe something that I hinted at earlier is overcoming, the next barrier of growth.
Okay,
Because, yeah,
that's more specific. I love that.
yeah. But at the same time, if it applies also if you were to go make a cup of coffee, because there's conflicts towards eventually having the coffee. So there's a goal, and there are steps to achieve the goal. And within that steps, you may experience conflicts, right? So the water has to be boiled, the coffee has to be placed in, and these are steps, and they're relatively simple. But if you're putting them into the context of the art of war, for example, it would make sense if you're able to metaphorically understand the concepts, which some people unfortunately are not inclined to perceive the beauty in that message.
So to recap in a sentence, based on what you've just said, history is...
Opportunity, I suppose.
And based on this opportunity, is history something that is only conjugated at a personal level, or does history also happen at a broader or collective level? And if so, how do the two interact?
It's inevitable that it's linked.
Okay.
We are not just individuals in life. We participate as an individual in, as a society. So what I do in my personal life has an effect, an echoing effect on other aspects of life. So what I do affects my family, affects my friends, affects my country, affects the world, affects wildlife, and there's probably endless links that you could make. And we're all on the same journey. I think maybe a physicist would disagree with me, but I feel like we're all in the same momentum of time. We're all going in the same direction. And so whatever's happening, we're all going through it together. We may be dealing with it in our own ways, but everything is linked. And there's no way to separate the two. And if you only think you're living in history for yourself, I think that's a very isolating principle. And I'm not sure you could actually survive with just being yourself. And I don't think you could be honest if you said you're just living history by yourself.
If there's an image that you could use to describe what you said, what would that image be?
Image to describe what I said. It would have to be some type of a Renaissance painting where people are working together. That's the only thing I can come up with, honestly.
That's cool. I like that. So is history a bad thing or is it a good thing?
Comes a little bit down to perspective about good and bad. I would say memories that I would have of not great moments, bad history. No, if you take it as an opportunity to learn, to become better. So good and bad really is so subjective. It has to be neutral. There's no way.
What has to be neutral?
I mean, history, it has to be neutral because there's the truth of what happened, which is something that exists. It's just undeniable. It's objective. There can be no good. There can be no bad. But there's also the lens, the spin that you take when you look at, history within some of the lenses that I mentioned. I was at a museum in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when you go to their museum, they call the Americans the devils. And it's quite funny when you look at it that way. It's a good museum. And it just really states that, it really uses the word devil, the American devils. And of course, you go maybe into a Western museum, and you would never see. You would see heroes. You would see this, and it's funny. So again, it comes down to the lens. You may use it as a weapon. You can also use it as a defense. But at the end of the day, it really is just truth of the lived experience that all collectively we've experienced. And if you spin that, is it still history or is it propaganda at that point? And that's a tough thing, but it falls under the same broader category.
Can we ever get at that truth? Or is it something that we know is out there, but we'll never be able to capture it?
I don't think you'll be able to really capture it. But I think one of the fun things about life, and I think what should be really everyone's purpose, is to try and attain and achieve as close as possible of living to the truth as you can, because then you're living history as it's happening rather than looking through a lens of history as it's happening, because you can look back through a lens, but you should be living it as objectively as possible. So whatever you do, you try to state the truth, you try to live the truth, you try to be truthful to yourself in the moment, and then I think you can achieve that type of truth, and that should be the goal.
That should be the goal. And in doing so, are you able to survive the world and feel complete and fulfilled, or have a belief that you're feeling fulfilled and complete?
Me personally, or as a general idea of you?
Both. Let's go for both.
Could you find fulfillment with that? It depends how heavy it weighs on a person. And I think some of the people I've met in life, the weight of history can destroy them. And that is their history. When, we lived in the same world, the history happened, it is an objective truth, but it doesn't hit me the same way. And so it is the perspective and the value or the cleanliness that we attach to history, whether it defines whether we are going to make it or not, so to speak. And it comes really down to the individual level. Because, if it was a truth that was told by us at school or something like that, we choose how that affects us. So if the Dutch government told me the Germans are bad to this day, I could be very easily inclined to think, oh, the Germans are bad. But why would I have a reason to think Germans are bad in this day and age? I don't. But somebody could tell me that. And so latching on to history is what could change your behavior. And therefore, I really think it's important to navigate it yourself rather than just taking what is out there and taking it just for the truth, when the truth only happens in the moment when you're observing it, and everything else really is just a lens of which you're looking it through. And if you're aware of that, maybe you could take another lens and see what is the most true for you, because that is going to be the most valuable. Maybe you cannot live that at a moment. I cannot live 60, 70 years ago, but I can find the lenses that match mostly with the way I would have looked at it at that time. So I'd try to find people that I would associate with that have that similar mindset. And then I think you'll be able to make it.
Are there any final thoughts you'd like to share or something that you'd like to elaborate on?
Well, it's a very interesting concept. I don't typically meet people in the academics or, have such a interesting concepts that you're proposing here. So it's been very interesting. I take a lot of flights because I travel around the world a lot. So it gives me a lot of time to just think and overthink to some degrees, because sometimes you're just sitting there and curiosities have to be filled. And when you don't have a Google or a set of answers, then you do start looking in yourself by necessity when you don't have any internet. So it becomes down to unique opportunities. And I'm glad we met. I'm glad we had a unique opportunity to talk about such a strange concept. And you talked about history in the beginning as an abstract, but I always conceive history to be very concrete and very, very truthful. Even though we talked about whether it's the truth or not the truth, but it has happened. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. So that is also an interesting concept overall. Yeah,
Very good. I really enjoyed our conversation.
me too.
Jerome Garot, thank you so much.
Thank you.